from the 0 Hour. I am, as always, your host, Richard RJ Eskow. There's a reason why we talk about Social Security and Medicare for all and related topics on this program. A social safety net is a vital part of being a civilized and humane society. We're not where we need to be at. We're not even where Franklin D. Roosevelt envisioned us being in 1935 when they first began working on legislation for Social Security. So here we are on the cusp of 2021 at the end of an election year. What has the last year done to and for Social Security? What can we expect in the coming year? Joining us now, and once again, I should say, is our good friend Linda Benish. Linda is the communications director for Social Security Works. So first of all, Linda, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on, Richard.
Well, it's always a pleasure. And let's start with this. It's been a roller coaster ride, at least from my perspective, for Social Security over the past year, and the roller coaster ride isn't over yet. That's my impression. Trump can still do damage in the 40 days or so he's got left. But if you had to, let's start with this. If you had to recap 2020 in terms of Social Security, where would you start?
Well, I would start, as with all things 2020, with the pandemic, right? Because that really completely upended everyone's plans for the year in all regards, and Social Security is no different. The plan for the year, which still happened to some extent, was so we have a bill, the Social Security 2100 Act, in the U.S. House. It has the support of over 90% of House Democrats, and the plan leading into the election really has been to hold hearings on it, to raise awareness, to make it very clear to the American people that Democrats are united in support of protecting and expanding Social Security benefits. And so that really, it did happen. And there was some action around the legislation, but it wasn't as focused on that as one might have expected before COVID.
Yeah, and if I could just stop you right there, we've had Representative John Larson on, who was the catalyst for Social Security 2100 for that bill. But I don't think the House leadership even brought it to a vote, did they? When John Larson was on, he said it had the support of the relevant committee chairman, who's Representative Richard Neal, but it was really up to Speaker Pelosi whether or not it would come to a floor vote. I don't think that has happened, or there's been much movement in that area. A, is that, am I right? And B, if so, is that COVID or something else that's responsible for it?
Yeah, that's correct. There hasn't been a floor vote, even though there have been hearings and all of the relevant committees and all the steps that you would need to take leading into one. And a big part of that, and maybe this is being somewhat generous to the Democratic leadership, but really is COVID and both what it did in terms of Congress's priorities, but also to the news cycle, right? To the fact that this was just such a huge story. And between coronavirus and the election, unfortunately, it can be very hard to get the media to cover bills that pass the House if they know that Mitch McConnell is just going to sit on them in the Senate. And so you can see it as that calculation that they really just want to wait until the time when something can actually happen with the bill. And so all of our eyes in that regard really are on next year. But that said, just because there wasn't a floor vote on the Social Security 2100 Act, that doesn't mean that it wasn't a big year for Social Security, including in the public discussion. And a big reason why was actually Donald Trump, and that he has this harebrained scheme to eliminate Social Security's funding source, which is the contributions that workers make in our paychecks every 2 weeks. And he said that if he was reelected, he was going to completely eliminate these payroll contributions, which means terminate the funding for Social Security. And so that's something that we really worked to draw attention to. And to their credit, Joe Biden's campaign worked to draw attention to leading into the election. And in fact, we saw tens of millions of dollars on ads about it. And so even if it maybe didn't get quite as much attention in the media, this is something that voters were hearing about, especially in swing states.
Linda Bennett of Social Security Works. It's worth taking a slight walk down memory lane when it comes to Donald Trump and Social Security. Back in 2015, 2016, as the Republican primaries began, when there were approximately 331 Republican candidates, I forget, I think there were 16 or something. Trump was the only one of the Republican presidential primary candidates who said he would not cut Social Security. And I would argue that, of course, there were many factors behind the rise of Trump, but I would argue that that's one of them, because polls show that Republicans, as well as Democrats, I'm talking about the voters, want to see Social Security protected and expanded and not cut. And then when he became president, as in so many things, Donald Trump became kind of a doctrinaire, a cookie cutter Republican who wants to cut Social Security and Medicare and other programs. He's taken various cracks at it. It seemed what you're talking about was after COVID, his idea of terrible on so many levels, and the idea of some other Republicans was, we'll stop deducting the payroll tax for Social Security, but they never said they were going to replace it with anything. There are a million reasons why it's bad. First of all, it only helps working people. We go to people without jobs that aren't helped, and so on. It's only a small amount per paycheck and all that. But the bottom line was, since he wasn't talking about replacing that money, Social Security was going to run completely out of funds to pay benefits in by 2023, 2024, something like that. I forget the date. What do you remember?
Yeah, so for disability benefits, it would have been next year in 2021. And then for the entire program would have ceased paying out benefits in 2023 if Trump had gotten his way.
So obviously bad. And we know that Republicans would never fund it out of general revenues. They would just vote against it time and time again. Trump had another, and this one I'm still worried about. Trump has another assault in mind for Social Security, which we've covered here, which is the plan to force people collecting Social Security disability benefits to re-qualify. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, but my understanding is that he could still potentially do that by executive action, but it couldn't be undone by Joe Biden's executive action. So we could be looking at a lot of disabled people losing their Social Security benefits. Do I have that right?
Yes, so it's a regulatory change. So Trump himself doesn't really have to do anything, but it's the people that he's installed on the top jobs at the Social Security Administration who are working to push through these last minute changes, some of which, as you said, are designed to kick people off of their Social Security disability benefits unjustly, and then others which are designed to make it more difficult to qualify by tightening the criteria, even though we already have some of the strictest eligibility criteria for Social Security disability benefits in the world. And it really should be said, Social Security disability, it's not a separate program. It's part of Social Security. Workers earn their disability benefits with every paycheck, just like retirement benefits and benefits for survivors. So yeah.
And I would only add, I have actually gone through in detail, read what it takes to become qualified for Social Security disability payments, benefits. And it's a difficult process. Number one, anyone who gets through it is clearly disabled. Asking people to repeat that process every year, every 2 years is incredibly onerous for a population by definition, has maybe having a harder time of it than most of us in certain ways. I mean, obviously there are many forms of disability, but so there's that piece of it. And if you don't get your notice or whatever, that you need to requalify, you could lose your benefits. So it's all, and as you say, making it harder to qualify in the first place when it's already extremely hard. To me, this is like Dickensian levels of cruelty. This is just brutal. And yet he's appointed people who theoretically are willing to do this, right?
Yes, in fact, it's the people that he's appointed who are really driving this train. And they're doing it in the middle of a pandemic where a lot of people who have COVID seem to be having really long-term symptoms. And we are going to have most likely some people, COVID long haulers, who are going to need Social Security disability benefits because they're permanently disabled as a result of Donald Trump's mismanagement of the pandemic. And these folks, if they're still in charge, they even can continue trying to push through these regulations after Trump leaves. And unfortunately, it's not a given that Joe Biden is going to replace them. We're pushing very hard for him to do so. But when Barack Obama took office, he left George W. Bush's people in charge at the top of the Social Security Administration for several years. And so that's a really big focus for us for the year ahead. And we think that it's essential for the rights of Social Security disability beneficiaries and everyone who wants to become a Social Security beneficiary or is one now, that Joe Biden needs to clean house of these people at the Social Security Administration on day one.
And again, we're talking with Linda Benish, who is the communications director for Social Security Works. Let's talk about that for a second, Linda, because a second more, I should say, because I think that's so important. Right now, the saying, it's become a cliche around Washington personnel as policy. These are not, I'm just going to say it, these are not nice people. These are not people who, in my view, believe in the program that they are now charged with administering. As bad as George W. Bush's appointees may have been, these people may be even worse. And we need to get rid of them. I honestly didn't know there was a campaign around getting rid of them. I think it's a great idea. So before we move on from that topic, because Joe Biden really needs to get rid of them day one, where can people go for more information on that?
So we have a petition that already has over 200,000 signatures on this, and people can go to socialsecurityworks.org to learn more. And also on our Facebook and Twitter pages, we're posting about it regularly. And yeah, this is just, it's so important. And in fact, you said worse than George W. Bush's appointees, and in some cases they are, but in many cases, they actually just brought back the same people, which is to show, to a large extent, this is a rot, in the whole Republican Party. And as you said, it's actually a place where Trump campaigned as different, but then he governed as the same, right? It is institutional Republican policy to be waging a war on Social Security and on people with disabilities.
And I'm glad you brought it back to that, Linda, because it is worth reiterating that just as George W. Bush's people were horrible on the Middle East and gave us the war in Iraq, they're horrible on Social Security, they're horrible on Medicare. They, like the entire Republican, we've had this myth over the past year, particularly Lincoln Project and nice Republicans and the good ones versus the bad ones. They're all horrible on Social Security and Medicare. And it's worth reiterating that now, both so that people understand what we're facing going forward, particularly if Republicans retain control of the Senate. And secondly, getting away from the C3, C4 problem of nonprofits, which isn't a problem for me. That's why we have to make sure that if at all possible, Democrats win in Georgia and the Republicans don't control the Senate, because they will continue their jihad against Social Security unless we can thwart them. So that was my paid political announcement. So before we pivot to what we might expect from the year coming up, any other thoughts about 2020? Do you think Social Security helped Biden win, or is there anything we haven't talked about that we should discuss about 2020?
Now, firstly, I would say that's a really good point about how this is all of the Republicans. And another big development on the Social Security front in 2020 was that Mitt Romney introduced something called the Trust Act, which would create a closed-door commission to cut Social Security benefits in secret. And this is something McConnell actually tried to put it into some of the COVID packages. We haven't seen its ugly head pop up in these current negotiations, but we're watching out for it. And the fact that it was Mitt Romney who was the sponsor, right? Hero of the resistance, shows that no, on Social Security and Medicare, he's not only no different than any other Republican, but he's actually the one driving the bus. And so without winning these Senate seats in Georgia, there's really no Republican votes that we can count on to help protect these programs, because they're all pretty unified in their desire to gut them. And in fact, another co-sponsor of the Trust Act is David Perdue, who's on the ballot in Georgia on January 5th.
Good point. And I always say, when people talk about a quote unquote moderate Republican in the Senate, I always say that quote unquote, and for those who are listening on the radio, I'm doing little air quotes here, that moderate, the first thing that moderate Republican senator, so-called, is going to do when a new Senate convenes is vote for Mitch McConnell as majority leader. So if you think that's moderate, we have different definitions of moderation. But now, Linda Benish, let's turn to 2021. Joe Biden, you were saying, ran on, a pretty good platform when it comes to Social Security. I got to say, maybe this is just post-traumatic stress on my part, Barack Obama said good things about protecting Social Security when he ran in 2008, and then he appointed a deficit commission with a specific mandate also to look at and potentially cut it as well and put it on the table in one of his own budgets. So do we have reason to maybe have more faith in Joe Biden than we should have had in Barack Obama? Maybe my question's too harsh. I don't know, but what do you think? Can we trust Joe Biden on this? Can we push him? Do you have a prediction? I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm sorry.
Yes, so I think that there is a lot of reason for optimism, and it's not because of whatever might be in Joe Biden's heart, but it's because of the work that grassroots activists have done over the last decade, that the conversation around Social Security is just in a very different place. We did not have a Social Security expansion bill with the support of 90% of House Democrats in 2008, 2009. And Joe Biden also, he really focused on Social Security in his campaign in a way that Democrats hadn't for a long time. As I was saying, there was tens of millions of dollars in ads on this. This is really what the people in swing states were seeing, and it had an effect. Joe Biden, we're going to know exactly how much senior voters moved, probably more in a little bit when we get the unweighted exit poll results, but we think that it might have been as much as like 3 or 4 points relative to 2016. And given that older voters vote at the highest rates, that actually represents an enormous amount of votes of people who swung for Joe Biden, in part because he promised to protect and expand Social Security, and who are counting on him to keep that promise.
And if I were an advisor to Joe Biden or the Democrats, I would be saying, let's say it is 3 points. Imagine what it could be in 2022 and 2024. First of all, congressional, obviously, in 2022 and re-election in 2024, assuming that Joe Biden runs for re-election. Imagine what the swing could be if you actually do something to expand Social Security between now and then. Imagine the backing you'll get from senior voters if you deliver for them. And of course, worth remembering that any one of us at any age can become disabled during our working career and become a Social Security beneficiary. And most of us hope to live to an age when we'll collect those benefits. So we're all in the Social Security boat together. So let's talk about, first of all, I'm curious. Did Joe Biden ever explicitly come out in support of the Social Security 2100 Act? I don't think he did, but did I miss something?
No, so Joe Biden hasn't come out in support of that bill because he has his own plan to expand Social Security, but they do have a lot of common features, including either lifting or phasing out the cap, which means that people making over about $136,000 a year don't contribute into Social Security on their income above that amount. And so Joe Biden is in favor of phasing out that cap and then using the revenue from that both to bolster Social Security's finances and to expand benefits. And so we feel that because there's quite a bit of overlap between his plan and the 2100 Act, that he can work with Congress to find legislation that works and that they can pass it through the House and he can sign it into law. And the question mark is the Senate. And we need those 2 seats in Georgia. And then we need Senate Democrats to be bold and eliminate the filibuster. And if those things happen, then I think it is absolutely possible that Joe Biden signs Social Security expansion legislation into law in 2021.
And refresh my memory, Linda Benich, because I think that one or both of these plans, the Biden plan and the Social Security 2100 Act, I think when that cap is lifted on income above that certain amount, which, by the way, Jeff Bezos makes in 28 seconds after the ball drops on New Year's Eve. If I recall correctly, there's like a donut hole where the tax doesn't get reimposed until you exceed 250,000 or something. Do one or both of those bills have that feature, or am I thinking of something else?
Yeah, so both of those bills have that feature, and that's because Democrats tend to sort of have these thresholds, which often to me seem rather high, but above or below which they don't want to raise taxes. So that's sort of a way to keep it into compliance with those pledges. And then every year, like, the amount will get higher. And so eventually it'll cover all income.
Oh, that makes sense. And we've covered the Social Security 2100 Act on the show. In terms of the Biden plan, I've glanced at it. I'm trying to remember. I think it modestly increases benefits overall, but has more of an increase at the lower income end to keep people out of poverty, and maybe some acknowledgement for women's unpaid labor. I can't recall precisely, but do you remember the details?
Yeah, so it's a mix of features. The overall benefit increase is that it changes the way that cost of living increases are calculated to the CPIE, which means that they will reflect the actual expenses of seniors, including the rising cost of medicines and other healthcare expenses. And so seniors can expect like a larger increase every year under the Biden plan. And then the other increases, as you've said, are targeted, including a caregiver credit for women who take some time out of the paid workforce to care for loved ones, whether that be children or older people. There's also a benefit bump for the oldest old. Right? We know that people in their 80s and 90s often rely on Social Security even more. And there's an increase in Social Security's minimum benefits so that the poorest beneficiaries will see a considerable increase in their monthly checks.
So I want to pivot a little bit now. And again, Linda Benich is the communications director for Social Security Works, and talk a little bit about Medicare, because the two issues in many ways are, especially for seniors, inextricably linked. As Medicare becomes more expensive, it takes up more of a person's Social Security benefits and so on, as well as disability recipients can be affected by it as well. So I guess my question for you is, any discussion or anything you're aware of in terms of either Joe Biden's platform and promises for Medicare, or other developments that might happen in 2021 when it comes to Medicare premiums, Medicare coverage, that sort of thing?
So Joe Biden has talked about a public option. He's talked about shoring up the Affordable Care Act, and he's talked about lowering the age. And we really think that lowering the age, like whether that be to 60 or even better 55, that's a really good way to go, especially with the COVID pandemic, where a lot of older folks either lost their jobs or had to quit because it just wasn't safe to keep working, especially with them being more vulnerable to the virus, and are not going to be able to find jobs again after the pandemic. And for people who are in their 50s and early 60s, it's especially difficult to find alternative affordable insurance, because the point of for-profit insurance companies is to make money. They don't want customers who have expensive healthcare costs. And so we think this is a really good time to talk about lowering the Medicare age. And then at the other end, Joe Biden should really consider covering all kids, right? Creating a Medicaid plan for people 0 to 18. And that's actually, it's relatively affordable because most kids don't have a lot of healthcare costs, but it really pays a lot of dividends later in terms of people are then healthier for the rest of their life. So since we're realistic that probably Joe Biden is not going to be looking to pursue Medicare for all, so those are some good starting points. And his choice for Health and Human Services Secretary, Javier Becerra, is someone who endorsed Medicare for all for many years in the House. And so we think that that's an excellent choice and very encouraging. And also, there's a lot of Trump sabotage on Medicare to undo as well. So they're going to be busy.
That's for sure. And let's talk about Becerra for a second, because whenever a Democratic administration comes into office, some of us watch with bated breath. I still remember the moment I heard Barack Obama name his economic team, and some of those developments. He was I would agree with you, very welcome choice. What do you think, if anything, what are you hearing about what that might represent in terms of Biden's intentions? Sometimes you pick a person, particularly a personality like Joe Biden, because you like them, you think they're a good person and all that. And sometimes you pick them because they're kind of going in the direction you want. Are you guys hearing anything about whether Becerra was just, the two people, Biden and Becerra, clicked, or whether it was more broader than that in terms of what a Becerra brings to the table in policy? Any ideas or inklings on that?
So it's a little bit hard to say. I mean, we do know the news reports that prior to that, Gina Raimundo, the governor of Rhode Island, may have been offered the job, and she's much more conservative, pro-corporate, and so that sort of indicates that maybe Biden wasn't looking to make an ideological statement one way or the other in his pick if he could swing from Gina Raimundo to Javier Becerra. But that said, whatever the reasons might have been, once Becerra has the job, he has the job, and there'll be a lot that he can do with it.
Yeah, and I am for one thrilled about it. So Linda, before I let you go, let's talk about the Senate a little bit. We know the Republicans are the implacable foes of everything we hold dear, but I'm a worrier, okay? And one of my worries is, even if we get the Senate, we meaning in this case a Democrat, it's going to be very tight. And all of a sudden, even if the Democrats get the Senate and repeal the filibuster, get rid of the filibuster, it's going to be the opportunity for, say, Joe Manchin or a Democrat like that to play the spoiler role that Joe Lieberman played in 2010. Now, I have my own theories about what Joe Lieberman did and the extent to which he was really operating on his own and all that. But the standard narrative is, we'd have had the public option, but Joe Lieberman didn't want it, or we'd had this or that, but Joe Lieberman didn't want it. I worry about a potential spoiler among the Democratic ranks. On the other hand, every Democratic politician understands how much Social Security means to their constituents. So without necessarily singling out Manchin, I mean, there could be somebody else. Do you worry about Democratic spoilers in the Senate, or does it seem that they just wouldn't cross the Social Security caucus out there among voters?
So we do have Joe Manchin actually on the record in support of Social Security expansion. That said, I think that this is a real concern, and it's a reason why their constituents, right, the American people, need to keep up the pressure. Not just assume that, okay, my senator is a Democrat, they're going to be doing good things, so I can go back to brunch, right? Socially distanced brunch.
Yeah, or Zoom brunch is okay
right.
too.
Yeah. But we need to keep calling them, keep showing up at their offices. Once it's safe, keep coming to DC and showing up at their DC offices too, and just making our voices heard to say, not only do we want to expand Social Security, but we want you to make it a priority, because Social Security is our most successful government program. We really are going to need a lot of action, because this is our country's worst crisis, arguably since the Great Depression. And what a better way to do it than to expand the crown jewel of FDR's New Deal, which is Social Security.
And one of the things I think people don't necessarily understand unless they've worked in Washington is just those calls, those emails, they make a huge difference. But you think, wow, they're way out there in Washington. I'm here in California or Idaho or Iowa or Arizona. Well, I can make a call, but what's the difference? If they get calls, they take note of it, right?
Yes, they really do. I mean, way back in, 2011 or so, I was a Senate intern, and we had to make a little note of all the calls. And there's really been a lot more mobilization on that front over the last 4 years, thanks to groups like Indivisible, which was actually founded by former congressional staff who know how it works. But the funny thing is, it's going to be even more important in the next 4 years than it was in the last four, especially for anybody with a Democratic senator, because most of the time, not always, Democratic senators could be counted on to vote against Donald Trump's agenda. And so I know sometimes people with Democratic senators were sort of frustrated, like, okay, I'll call them, but they're going to vote the right way. But now, under a Democratic president, when we can actually get things passed, it's going to be more important than ever to keep the pressure on your Democratic senators and House members as well.
Is there a tool or anything like that where people can generate emails or get numbers, or because there should be?
Yeah, so we're regularly sending out petitions which are directed to people's members of Congress. I know indivisible.org is also a really great resource for several tools of that type as well, if people want to take a look. And that's another thing that really gives me hope is all these people who've organized in their own communities over the last 4 years. And I think if even just a large percentage of them stays engaged, we're really going to see a very different situation than we did under Obama, who kind of systematically dismantled the grassroots that got him elected as soon as he took office. And I think this grassroots, it's not Joe Biden's grassroots, it's one that's sprung up organically by people who know that they don't work for him.
Well, and Joe Biden has said over and over again, he wants to be the most transformative president since FDR. We're going to hold him to that and then some. So Linda Benish, Communications Director for Social Security Works, thanks for giving us this recap and preview, respectively, of 2020 and 2021. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and you're listening to The Zero Hour.